liftoff.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
This whole thing was a fake.
Eagle has landed. What a ride, what a ride.
Flag flaps on the moon where there's no atmosphere.
NASA could have covered it up.
NASA could have pulled off the greatest hoax of all time.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Guys looking good, down a half. Lights on, picking up some dust. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
There were many problems that evolved during the 60s that led people to believe that we're never going to make it to the moon. Then seemed phony to me. I think it was an intuitive feeling that what was being shown was not real.
There are always going to be people who believe some outlandish theories, and the notion that we somehow were able to fake the lunar missions is pretty outlandish.
I can't say 100% for sure whether these men walked on the moon. It's possible that NASA could have covered it up just in order to cut corners and to be the first to allegedly go to the moon.
People assumed that the nation that won the space race would win the Cold War. We defined that as being first to the moon. It was a time of more or less national hysteria. The New York Times had to publish an article explaining to Americans that it did not carry nuclear bombs that could be dropped on the city from that altitude.
House Speaker announced in Congress that we may be headed for extinction.
The chances of getting to the moon and returning safely to Earth were something like 0.0017%. In other words, virtually an impossibility.
What actually happened in my mind is that during the 60s, they said, if you can't make it, fake it.
The astronauts were launched with the Saturn V. Then, in order to account for their disappearance, they simply orbited the Earth for 8 days. And in the interim, they showed these fake pictures of the astronauts on the moon. But on the 8th day, the command capsule separated from the vehicle and descended to Earth, as of course was shown in films.
We do not claim this planet in the name of America. We claim it in the name of all the people of the planet Earth.
I believe, had they wanted to, that NASA could indeed have pulled off the greatest hoax of all time, never sent anyone to the moon, and recreated it in a television studio.
and I believe it could have been done at that time. The technology was in place.
The footing is solid. The surface seems powdery.
Surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe.
What we put up on the screen was our own simulated version of whatever we could do within a $4.8 million budget.
The reason I believe that NASA and the government faked the moon landing was basically it was technically impossible to do it. And they simply had to come up with some sort of alternative that they felt the public would believe. Area 51 is one of the most heavily guarded facilities in the United States. If you went in and tried to get some information, you could be shot and killed without any warning.
It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States.
This is a very secret base, and with good reason, because undoubtedly the moon sets are still there.
Tranquility Base here.
The noise level of a rocket engine is up into the 140, 150 decibel range. In other words, enormously loud. How would it be possible to hear astronauts' voices against the background of a running rocket engine?
Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
The LEM had a single engine mounted dead center, and then they had little push jets, thruster jets, a couple of them up on top. This was supposed to control their attitude as they came down. Well, I'll tell you a secret. The instant you moved your tail in that cabin an inch, you would change the load pattern, it would begin to tilt, and it would start that thing spinning.
The arguments that have been arrayed on the side of those who believe that the lunar landings were a hoax are very elaborate, and they have to be to support a theory like this. In the end, there's one set of evidence that is irrefutable, and that is that there are footprints, boot prints, still on the lunar surface.
The surface appears to be very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
To have a powerful rocket engine blast the surface of the moon, blasting away all of the dust, and then find footprints surrounding the lunar lander, that to me would be an impossibility.
The fact that there's no blast crater under the LEM is one of the most conclusive pieces of evidence that I find supporting the hoax.
The amount of thrust that you need coming out of the bottom of the descent engine is about 1,500, 2,000 pounds of thrust. And all that does is just push dust away. There's no burning or anything like that.
And there's one other point. If they had truly landed on the moon, this dust would have then descended on the lunar lander, on the foot pads, and we find not a trace of dust on the foot pads. When I discovered that alone, I said, no way am I looking at a lunar lander that landed on the moon. When Armstrong said, that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, the footprint that he made could have easily been made in Area 51. In the footage of the ascent stage going up, what you don't see is an exhaust plume coming out of a rocket engine nozzle.
What a ride, what a ride.
But what do we see? We see the ascent stage suddenly pop up without any exhaust plume whatsoever, as though it were jerked up by a cable.
Posed that this was all faked and a hoax. They have to say that every piece of evidence, that every physical scientific test that one could offer to support the reality of the lunar landings, they have to say that all of those are fake.
I would say that my conviction that Apollo was a fake was really not according to one specific piece of evidence, but it was cumulative. This whole thing was a fake.
We're getting a picture on the TV.
All of the photographs were faked.
Our research suggests that images of the Apollo landings are not a true and accurate record. In our view, the Apollo pictures were faked. Many of the images are replete with inconsistencies and anomalies.
And we're getting a picture on the TV. You got a good picture, huh?
But if you go back and look at it, the Apollo 11 mission was some pretty awful video by today's standards. These were ghostly images. It just did not look very real at all. And that was a function of the transmitter at the time, the camera at the time that we had available to us to fly on Apollo 11.
NASA orchestrated the hoax in a very unique way, through television. They had one picture which they completely controlled, black and white, grainy, that convinced everybody we were on the moon. We had no reason to doubt it. They had complete reins over the pictures, over the sound. I mean, sad to say, it was easier than people believe.
It's absolutely unreal.
The fact that the flag flaps on the moon where there's no atmosphere means that there must have been a little blast of wind out in Area 51 where they shot this.
Once on the moon, on the lunar surface, in the dress, in the life support system, you couldn't see the camera. They couldn't bend their head that far down. They had no viewfinder, they had to aim by moving their body.
Click. Click.
The pictures that we see that allegedly were taken on the moon are absolutely perfect. Unfortunately, errors were made which are now being discovered.
They had no extra lighting, no flashes or things like that.
The shadows cast by the rocks in the foreground should have been east-west, like the LEM shadow.
Outside in sunlight, shadows always run parallel with one another. So the shadows will never intersect.
It seems like he's standing in the spotlight. And I can't explain that. That escapes me. Why?
There's more than one light source, which means they're not on the moon.
There are a number of claims that the pictures taken by Apollo astronauts were faked. And there are so many, it would be an exercise in futility to go off and try to answer all of those.
What a ride, what a ride.
Evidence are some pictorial anomalies in the photographic record of the trip to the moon. There is one for Apollo 16 where the same shot, the same hill, appears in 2 different days.
But it couldn't pick a better spot.
It is the most beautiful sight.
The conspiracy theorists see that as evidence that we didn't go to the moon, that it was staged, and the opposite point of view is that it's a case of bad editing.
It's absolutely unreal.
This situation is impossible and has to be the result of technical manipulation and doctoring of the image.
Some range from incredibly complicated to incredibly goofy. There are arguments that are wrong optically, they're wrong physically, they're wrong scientifically, they're wrong historically. There's a great deal of claptrap that is sort of woven in to these arguments.
When I looked at all the pictures and all the footage, I'm absolutely convinced, I bet my life on it, that we didn't go to the moon. I know for a fact that we didn't.
The program could be stopped dead in its tracks.
He was going to blow the whistle on the whole project.
Before they got one halfway to the moon, they would have picked up a death dose of radiation.
You copy? No, I didn't read you, Chuck, at all. I can't read you, Chuck. You want to try the phone? Hey, how do I get the moon? We can't fly between three buildings. I can't hear a finger's word.
I think it was intentionally sabotaged by someone. It's been a question in my mind what was found in the accident investigation and how was that handled. Was the CIA involved or whoever? But it was done intentionally.
This gave his life for this program, and I feel like that it is up to NASA to come forward and give us a direct answer to what really happened.
Any pressure on you by NASA?
Nothing. We were, my wife and I were somewhat harassed at home when this first thing broke some time back, but it's gone away now.
There was a real fear that the program could be stopped dead in its tracks.
I believe that Thomas Ronald Barron was murdered because he had the truth to tell about the Apollo project. To keep something that's a lie wrapped up and covered over, you've got to eliminate all the people that can talk about it.
There were probably 250,000 people who were directly involved in the Apollo program, and another 500,000 people beyond that. 750,000 people can't keep a secret like that. That's just not going to happen.
Very few people at NASA knew. The thing is so departmentalized. You got the person building the bolts in Houston, or doing this in Seattle, or doing this in Florida. No one knows the full picture. So, you had no one seen the full picture of anything except a handful of people.
Getting them past the radiation belt would have been impossible.
The reason why they couldn't go to the moon is because of a phenomenon that few people know about, called the Van Allen radiation belts.
Any human being traveling through the Van Allen belt would have been rendered either extremely ill or actually killed by the radiation within a short time thereafter.
Every manned mission in history, Gemini, Mercury, Skylab, the Space Shuttle, has been below the radiation belt, all except going to the moon.
Obviously, the only shielding they had was the literally paper-thin outer hull of aluminum, and their suits consisting of glass fiber, some aluminum fibers, and silicon rubber.
It's very interesting concerning radiation that the astronauts were protected by a thin film of aluminum when here on Earth they put a lead shield on us when they take a dental x-ray.
A magnetic storm will come along, and that can increase the intensity of the radiation belts by maybe 1,000 times above what it was before.
Around the rotating sun came this immense flare, the biggest one of the 20th century. It went on for 3 or 4 days. All the while it's slowly rotating around. NASA had another problem, and one is that the moon's surface is totally inhospitable to man. If you do it in the dark, and that includes any part of the shadow of the spacecraft itself, the temperatures go down to 250 degrees below zero. In the sun, the temperatures go up to 250 degrees above zero.
The claim that the radiation on the lunar surface would have incapacitated or hurt the astronauts, it's equal parts bad science and a bad understanding of how we went about designing the equipment. The spacesuits that they wore were incredibly tough and very resilient to lots of different things.
If those suits do what NASA says they can do, then I want to see them suit up a guy or two, put him into 3 Mile Island, the pit there that's still hot, and have them clean up the mess. But they can't and they don't.
This is the main reason why the Russians never really intended to send the men to the moon.
Of course, we were worried to go out into the unknown of space. Of course, we were fearful. We had no idea how a human would be affected by the radiation. We suspected that possibly the radiation could even penetrate through the craft itself.
I would say that anybody who believes that we did not go to the moon is an absolute nut.
Anyone that wants to call me a kook or a nut or a crackpot, they're welcome to do that, but they're also welcome to go examine the evidence, which is everywhere.
Bottom line, the United States went to the moon in the 1960s and the 1970s. End of story.
I would like to invite NASA and all of their supporters to simply take the most powerful telescope on Earth and see if there's a lunar lander there. If there's a lunar lander there, I'll never say another word about an Apollo hoax. If there's no lunar lander there, I'll rest my case.